Hi everybody, my name is Christine Stevenson and I am a biology professor at Central Arizona College here in Pinal County. And today I'm going to be talking about the COVID-19 vaccinations that have been gradually rolling out across the state. There's a lot of information flying around about these vaccines, and sometimes it can be hard to know what's true. So in this video, I am going to present to you some of the most common questions that my students have asked me about the COVID-19 vaccinations and answer those questions for you. Before I do, I want to point out that the pandemic is still an emerging situation. Not only is our knowledge about the virus changing, but the virus itself is also changing. And so the answers to these questions will reflect our knowledge at the current time, but as time goes on, more and better knowledge will be acquired. With that in mind, let's take a look at some of the most commonly asked questions about the COVID-19 vaccinations. So at the time of recording this video, there are two different vaccines that have been authorized in the United States for prevention of COVID-19. One is made by the company Pfizer, and the other one is made by the company Moderna. And both of these vaccines do work. Clinical trials of the Pfizer vaccine found that it was 95% effective at preventing COVID-19, while clinical trials of the Moderna vaccine found that it was 94.1% effective at preventing COVID-19. No vaccine is 100% effective, but these numbers are considered very good in the world of vaccines, and they are similar to the percent effectiveness of other vaccines that we routinely use to prevent other diseases, such as the vaccine that covers measles, mumps, and rubella, or the vaccine that covers tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. This is a good and valid question, because most vaccines take much longer to create, and so that leaves you wondering, how did this happen? Were any corners cut in the making of the COVID-19 vaccine? But it turns out that there are some special circumstances that apply to COVID-19 which allowed the vaccine development to move at a lightning-fast pace. One of these circumstances was the existence of previous knowledge about related coronaviruses. Because, in fact, COVID-19 is not the first coronavirus that the world has had to grapple with. In the past, there have been outbreaks of COVID-19's closely related cousins known as SARS and MERS. SARS stands for Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome, and MERS stands for Middle East Respiratory Syndrome. SARS was a virus that emerged in the early 2000s in China and caused a deadly outbreak that killed 1 in 10 people who were infected. And at the time, this virus was intensely studied. But as the outbreak came under control through other means, such as quarantine, the interest in developing a vaccine waned because it was no longer needed. However, the information that was gathered at the time that SARS was studied became invaluable to forming a foundation for scientists to understand the COVID-19 pandemic. So we weren't starting from a blank slate. Another reason why the COVID-19 vaccines were able to be developed so quickly is money. It's probably no surprise that governments around the world have been pouring a landslide of funding into the project of developing COVID-19 vaccinations. By the time the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines were authorized in December 2020, the US federal government had poured $12.4 billion into the vaccine research and development effort, which is a massive amount of money for a vaccine to get. In fact, that amount is 200 to 400 times greater than the average amount of money that it takes to develop a vaccine. And so it makes sense that with a larger amount of money and more resources, the job was able to get done that much faster. The third factor that sped up vaccine development was the fact that the process for manufacturing the COVID-19 vaccinations, while not cheap, is straightforward and fast. Vaccines can be formulated in different ways. Some vaccines contain what is called a live attenuated version of a virus, which means a version that has been disabled so that it cannot cause an infection, but your immune system can still learn from it. However, this is not the way that the COVID-19 vaccines are formulated. Instead, both the Pfizer and Moderna COVID-19 vaccines contain just a small piece of the virus, called mRNA. mRNA stands for messenger ribonucleic acid, and this is a chemical that is found in the cells of all living organisms. The role of mRNA is to be a communicator of genetic information to other parts of the cell. So this mRNA carries a message about what the COVID-19 virus looks like to your immune system so that your immune system can then learn from that and develop defenses. It turns out that manufacturing mRNA is a pretty straightforward process that can be accomplished in the lab artificially without needing to grow COVID-19 viruses. So this is another advantage in terms of speed. The best information that we have about the side effects of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines comes to us from their clinical trials. The Pfizer vaccine trial involved 38,000 people, while the Moderna vaccine trial involved 28,000 people, all of whom were diligently tracked for the weeks and months after receiving the vaccine to determine what side effects they may experience. The trials were set up so that half of the individuals received the real vaccine, while the other half received what is called a placebo, which is a harmless but ineffective dose that provides no immunity to COVID-19. And the reason why the trials were arranged this way is so that the group of people who received the real vaccine could be compared in effectiveness and side effects to the group of people who did not receive the vaccine. And that way, the effectiveness of the vaccine could be determined. Here are the most common side effects that were reported after receiving the real version of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Obviously, having arm pain in the spot where the vaccine was given was the most common side effect. However, the other common side effects, which included fatigue, headache, muscle pain, chills, joint pain, and fever, are all related to your immune system's natural response to receiving the vaccine. These are all signs that your immune system is recognizing the vaccine, learning from it, and building up its natural defenses. In addition to these common mild side effects, the clinical trials revealed one rare but moderate side effect that could be related to the vaccine, but more research is needed to say for sure. Out of the 33,000 people across both of the trials that received the real version of the vaccine, 7 were discovered to develop a case of what is called Bell's palsy. On the other hand, only 1 person who received the placebo version developed Bell's palsy. But what is Bell's palsy? It is a temporary facial weakness or paralysis on one or both sides of the face, which is typically temporary and goes away after a few weeks and can be treated with steroids. We still don't know for sure whether or not these cases of Bell's palsy had a relationship to the vaccine or whether it was merely coincidence. More investigation will be needed to tell for sure. So that covers the side effects. But what about allergic reactions? Neither the Pfizer or Moderna clinical trials recorded any incidences of the severe form of allergic reaction known as anaphylaxis. However, as these vaccines have been administered to a larger number of people across the country, some cases of allergic reactions have happened. However, they are extremely rare. As of the end of January 2020, nearly 23.5 million people had received a dose of these vaccines, and only 71 cases of anaphylaxis had been uncovered as a result of the vaccination. Furthermore, most people who experienced an anaphylactic reaction had a history of these types of reactions and therefore were more at risk in general. So these types of reactions are extremely rare, and even when they do occur, they're typically treatable with a dose of an EpiPen. In fact, guidelines say that after receiving your vaccine, you should wait around on-site for 15 minutes in order to be monitored and ensure that you don't have any sort of reaction. If you have a history of anaphylactic reactions, then you are required to wait for 30 minutes. Virtually all allergic reactions of this nature will occur within a 30-minute time period, and therefore, this is a prudent and careful policy. Both the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines require a 2-dose course in order to provide you with full immunity. A single dose lowers your chances of catching the virus, but it doesn't get you all the way to that 94 to 95% protection rate. The second dose of the Pfizer vaccine is recommended to be received 21 days or 3 weeks after the first dose, while the second dose of the Moderna vaccine is recommended to be received 28 days or 4 weeks after the first dose. Then, after receiving your final dose, immunity doesn't kick in for a few more days. The Pfizer clinical trial showed immunity occurring 7 days after the final dose of the vaccine, whereas immunity occurred 14 days after the final dose of the Moderna vaccine. This is a question I'm sure everyone wishes they had the answer to right now, but the fact of the matter is we just don't know how long immunity will last as a result of these vaccines. And this makes sense because the vaccines are still so new. The Pfizer and Moderna clinical trial showed that the vaccines provided immunity for at least 3 months. They may and probably do provide immunity for longer than that, but more time will need to pass before we can say for sure. Participants in the clinical trials agreed to be tracked for at least 2 years after receiving the vaccine, and so Pfizer and Moderna will continue to determine the level of immunity in their participants over this period of time, and we'll get more information as time goes on. Another factor that will come into play is the mutation of the virus itself. You may have heard that there are different strains emerging in locations around the world that are slightly altered and in some cases more contagious compared to the original coronavirus. The vaccine right now shows evidence of being partially effective against these strains. However, as the virus continues to change, there may be a need to develop booster vaccines which provide immunity to these new and developing strains. But one thing to keep in mind is that the faster people get vaccinated, the less likely the virus is to mutate. And this is because mutations are a natural result of random mistakes that happen when the virus is multiplying inside of our bodies. So the fewer number of people who catch the virus, the fewer opportunities the virus has to multiply, the fewer mistakes get made, and the more similar its genetic material remains over time so that we have a steady virus to fight against. Thank you all for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope you stay healthy and safe out there.